All right, I have 6:35 on my clock. Um, I'm sure there will be some other people that will trickle in, but let's go ahead and get started. Welcome again. This is the Veirs Mill Road Bus Rapid Transit Corridor Advisory Committee meeting. My name's Corey Pitts. I'm the planning section manager here at our Department of Transportation and our Division of Transportation Engineering. I'm going to go over just a couple of housekeeping things, and then I'm going to turn it over to our project manager, Michael Mitchell, to actually run through tonight's presentation. So I'm going to go over just a couple of controls. I'm sure by this point, many of us are very familiar with the Zoom platform. We're all pros at this point, but I do want to just run through a couple of things. So we've started everyone off in a muted condition. This just helps us avoid any background noise and people talking over each other. So when we do get to the question and answer periods, we will ask that people raise their hands, and I'll go over how to do that in a couple of seconds. But for now, everyone's muted, and we would ask that you please stay muted just to cut down on the background noise. Do feel free if you want to turn on your camera. I think the meeting's small enough that we shouldn't overwhelm the bandwidth. If we do find that that's a problem, we can turn off the cameras except for the individual presenting, but feel free if you want to turn on your camera. I will note that the meeting is being recorded. So if you don't want your likeness or your voice recorded, don't turn on your camera or use your microphone. You can submit questions via the chat. So you can submit questions via the chat window. There's a chat button at the very bottom. If you click on that, it'll bring up the chat window. Feel free to drop the chat questions to everyone if you would like, or you can send them to Jennifer Owers. There's a drop-down menu there in the to box if you want to send them specifically to Jennifer, and she will relay them to us. But feel free to just drop them into the chat so that everyone can see them as well if you would like. When we do get to the Q&A portions of the meeting tonight, we would ask that people raise their hands, and that way we can do this in kind of an orderly fashion and recognize people and then have them unmute themselves. In order to raise your hand, you'll see a reactions button at the very bottom of your Zoom screen, and you'll click the raise hand button, and it'll alert us that your hand has been raised. As you can see, Monica has raised her hand. If you've only called in by phone and you want to raise your hand, if you hit *9, that will indicate to us that those on the phone have raised their hand if you're not following along on the actual Zoom app platform. I think those are the big things tonight. Again, the meeting is being recorded. We'll post a recording of this after the fact. If you want to go back through anything that's been covered, or if you know someone that wanted to attend that couldn't, we'll send out that link and everyone can follow along then. With that, we'll go to the next slide and I'll run through the agenda, and then I'll turn it over to Michael. So just a quick overview of what we're going to cover tonight. So Michael's going to go through and give us a project status on where things sit currently. We are going to talk specifically about a couple of design updates tonight. We're going to focus in on the pedestrian and bike access and safety pieces of the project, as well as the station design. Some of you may have participated in a survey we did over the summer relating to station design, so we'll talk a little bit about that and how that's influencing our design going forward. We'll break after those two topics and go through some questions and answers related to that. And then we'll get back into more design updates focusing on stormwater management and transit signal priority. And Michael will go into more detail as to what transit signal priority is for those of you that may have not heard that term before. We'll talk about how this project is coordinating with other projects along the Veirs Mill Road corridor. We'll close out with the project schedule and next steps. And then obviously at the very end, there'll be more time for questions and answers on anything that anyone has questions about. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael to introduce himself and run through the presentation.
Good evening, everybody. As Corey indicated, I'm Michael Mitchell. I'm the project manager for this project, which is the Veirs Mill Road Bus Rapid Transit. For those of you who attended the previous presentations, you will see that as far as the corridor, the length of the corridor, the limits, it hasn't changed. Neither have the stations. The project is from Wheaton, from Georgia Avenue, basically, where Veirs Mill Road connects to Georgia Avenue, all the way to Maryland 355. That is roughly 6 miles. And in the blue dots that you see in the map, those are the stations. As I indicated, the station locations have not changed. Then the corridor, the bus rapid transit runs along Maryland 355 to Montgomery College. That is a distance of about 1.5 miles. So altogether, it's about 7.5 mile corridor. On the map, what you see, the red dash lines, that's the existing WMATA's Red Line Metro, and the green dash line shows the major trails, hiker-biker paths that run through park property, Rock Creek Trail and Matthew Hansen Trail. Next. As far as the project status, we pretty much have completed preliminary design. We have coordinated with stakeholders. I will talk about that in more detail, but briefly I'll tell you the major stakeholders are Maryland State Highway Administration. Both of the roads that I mentioned, Veirs Mill Road and Maryland 355, are state roads. We are coordinating with the city of Rockville, with Park and Planning, and with the federal government, Federal Transit Agency, and as well as Park and Planning and private developers. We have conducted public surveys. We held like a community outreach earlier this summer in Wheaton, and we had very good responses in person and via online, the surveys that we conducted. So we got good feedback. The comments were regarding the access to the stations and the design of the stations. So I'll be talking about that briefly later on. Next. As far as some of the things we have done in developing the preliminary design, where feasible, we have reduced the length of the crossing distances, the crosswalks, by making it easier for pedestrians to cross. We are working on the access to the stations to get people to the stations. I'll talk about that in more detail. And where possible, we have eliminated or narrowed the right turn slip lanes, slip ramps as we call them, at intersections. This makes it much safer for pedestrians to cross, and it makes the operation of the whole corridor better, especially in terms of safety and the county's Vision Zero. Next slide. These are the next few slides are some of the, if I want to call it, more changes as far as the geometric design that we have looked at. I want to reiterate the location of the stations have not changed, but what we tweaked or adjusted were like the Q-jump lanes or issues having to do with pedestrian safety. This is at the Twinbrook Parkway, and we evaluated pedestrian connections, and we added a crosswalk and also a crosswalk going across the service road, westbound service road. These are all for improving pedestrian safety. What is shown in kind of yellow-orange in the westbound direction is the Q-jump lane, and it's going to be shared with the right turn lane for buses. That's exactly running along each directions. And on the south side, that is the Q-jump lane. That hasn't changed from the original design. What is shown in purple is the eastbound BRT station, and next to it, further east, is the relocated bus stop. And on the north side of the image, or in the westbound direction, again, the larger purple pad that you see is the BRT station, and next to it or east of it is the relocated bus stop. The light purple line that you see parallel to the road, those are the improved sidewalks. Exactly. And then also what you see in light blue are the stormwater management facilities. I will talk about the stormwater management in more detail, but since this slide shows it, I will mention that, one of the things that we have to address is by the state and local regulations is the stormwater management needs of the project. And this is one location where we have put grass swales to meet the stormwater management requirements. Next slide. This is Connecticut Avenue, and this is probably where we have the most significant geometric changes to what's existing today. If Scott can run, thank you, run the video. This is the existing condition. If you look, there are slip ramps where the cars are using to avoid the intersection. And now what you see would be the modified version of the intersection where all the slip ramps have been eliminated. The longest one was from eastbound Veirs Mill Road going southbound on Connecticut Avenue. That long one, yes, as Scott is pointing with his cursor, has been eliminated. It's been rerouted and shortened, and pretty much everybody has to stop before making the right turn. Among the improvements are enhanced crosswalks and smoothed out and, you know, much easier to use sidewalks for pedestrians. And the BRT station is what we call a floating station, is in an island, exactly, as Scott is pointing out to it, and next to it is the relocated bus stop, eastbound bus stop. This intersection now on this slide, it is not as readily visible, but we also took advantage of.
What's gonna happen because these wheels, all of the wheels.
Thank you. Although the slide doesn't show it as readily, by removing the existing slip ramps, we found space, if you will, or room to put the stormwater management facilities. So where there used to be slip ramps, now there's going to be a few stormwater management facilities. Exactly. That's one of them that Scott was pointing to. Okay. This is probably the intersection with the most significant geometric modifications once the project is completed. Next. This is Norris Drive. In terms of the location of the BRT station or the bus stops, that hasn't changed. But what we did was we evaluated the pedestrian connections and compatibility with the proposed traffic signal. And, you know, we added crosswalks, as you can see, going exactly across Veirs Mill Road or the service road. And we continued to looking at the operation of the signals to make it, you know, more pedestrian friendly and to have an added safety measure. And the sidewalk that's shown on the south side or on the eastbound direction, it's new. That's a new sidewalk to provide connection along eastbound Veirs Mill Road. Next. As far as the station design, this slide that you're looking at is the proposed station at Montgomery College. We took in all the comments that we received in the surveys that I previously mentioned. People were asking for more seating and more canopy cover. And those are the things that we have been looking at in terms of the design of the stations themselves. And the larger canopies obviously provide, you know, better or more weather protection. And the other component, in addition to the surveys, is, if you will, the lessons that we are learning from the US 29 flash that has been in operation for almost a year now. So, next slide. This one is the proposed station at Twinbrook Parkway. Next slide. And this is the proposed station on Randolph Road. And finally, this is the station at the Terminus Point, the Wheaton Metro station. In the image that you see in the upper right-hand side, that's an aerial view. The orange line shows the path of the BRT line that it will come and circulate through the parking lot. What you see, if you can, Scott can show it from the aerial image, those are all the various WMATA bus stops or ride-on bus stops exactly along that route. And the purple one is the proposed BRT station. It is fairly close to the access to the metro station. So that is the location of the BRT station for Wheaton, and the image that you see is the proposed design of the station. Next. This is a good point to stop to take any questions you may have on what I have covered so far.
Michael, there was a question from Mike Stein. He says the county's bicycle plans imagine shared use paths along Veirs Mill Road between Twimbrook Parkway and approximately Twimbrook Metro Station. Have you considered installing those as a part of Veirs Mill Road project to improve access for cyclists and pedestrians?
Okay, well, thank you, Mike, for that question. If I may say,
sorry, this is Mike. I think I might have mistyped. I meant along Twimbrook Parkway, not along Veirs Mill Road.
That's fine. I mean, I'll still address the question as though it was posed. In a manner of speaking, you jumped the gun after these round of questions. Some of the topics we were going to talk about was the pedestrian and cyclist facilities. And if you just wait a few seconds, it might be better for me to cover it when we reach that. So I will talk about that at that point.
Thank you.
With the opening of this flash route, what's the intent of keeping the Q Metrobus routes for the local portion? Has that been worked out with Metro?
Yes, we are coordinating both with Metro and the county's ride-on bus system. We coordinate, in fact, very closely with both of them. And obviously, they're going to adjust the routes. I mean, the route probably will stay the same, but as far as the schedule, they may make some tweaks to it. But obviously, once the BRT is up and running, they will take a closer look to see if there is any adjustments that they need to make to either of those two services.
I guess to tie in with that, are there stop level ridership data pulled from any of the APCs or automatic passenger counters on the Q routes, or if there's any on the ride on 48 along this alignment that would help you guys in terms of projected ridership, in terms of what would be, how many riders would be coming from those current routes as opposed to riders that would not be served by these planned station stops? You follow? Yeah.
During the planning stage, obviously, we took numbers, the data available in terms of the ridership for WMATA and Ride-On. That, in fact, was one of the factors that went into choosing or fine-tuning the location of the stations for this project, the Veirs Mill BRT project. But as far as I don't think we went into the very nitty-gritty of, taking APC counters at signalized intersections and so forth. But as far as during the planning, the location of the BRT stations, definitely that was one set of data that went into it. If Corey wants to add to that, Corey can jump in.
I was just going to add that, likely at some point as the project advances, we are looking at pursuing federal funding for the project, and they will likely require an update to that ridership forecast that was done during the planning stage. So it has been done, it will continue to be done, and we'll continue to monitor kind of the ridership and how the local routes and the flash service would work together in concert.
May I have a comment on the transit along Veirs Mill Road? Hello?
Sure, go ahead.
Sure.
Yep.
Yes. Since 2010, I've been formally pursuing the prospect of operating streetcars along Georgia Avenue and Veirs Mill Road corridors along the center, along the center of the road right of way with side loading stops throughout. This would eliminate the need for your buses to weave in and out of traffic. It also would provide a pollution-free transportation system. And in spite of the fact that I've been, as part of my company, Capital Traction and Electric, trying to formally pursue this, it seems that the county tends to try to solve all the transit problems by buying more diesel-powered buses. And you might call it bus rapid transit, but if it's still part of the regular traffic, you see, it's not all that rapid. with a separate right of ways on the roadway center for streetcars, they don't have to weave in and out. And even if they are going at the speed limit, they will go get where they're going much more quickly. I would like to suggest this.
Thank you for your comment. Any other questions?
Yeah, we've got a couple. We have one from Ethan Goffman, who says, is there any chance of eventually extending the line to Silver Spring? That would do wonders for connectivity. For instance, it would make it much easier for students living in Rockville to get to UMD once the purple line is going.
Well, I'm sure you noticed that there's a connection to the red line. So by the connection to red line, they may have to change, from bus to metro, but the connection is rather easy that way. But at this point, for this project, we are not considering extending this line to Silver Spring at this point. But what I can talk about is in the other direction. I know you asked me about going in south direction, but the project does coordinate with the other project along 355 that runs in a north corridor towards the northern part of the county. So we are coordinating with the other BRT project.
And I will add that there is a master planned BRT corridor for Georgia Avenue, and that if that corridor were to move forward, it would, might make sense to start connecting some of these routes together and interlining them so that we can make connections.
And we have another question from Omar, specifically about his property around First Street and Stone Street. Will BRT affect that area?
I could not tell you off the top of my head. What I can tell you is we do not have any displacements, and in terms of property acquisition needs, we have drastically reduced it from the time that this project was at the planning stage with SHA. If you shoot me an email, my information is going to come up at the very end of this presentation, Omar. I'll be more than happy to take a look at it and get back with you via email. But off the top of my head, it will be very difficult for me to say each property owner whether we have any property needs from them or not.
And we can get Omar's email address after this and connect you to.
Thank you.
Is there a projected travel time savings for this BRT route versus current local service? And maybe I missed it. Was there intended to be dedicated lanes for this BRT route that would speed service along this corridor other than TSP, transit signal priority, speeding these buses up?
Well, there are dedicated lanes in quite a bit of the project, but obviously not all of it because of the right-of-way constraints. And yes, there are savings. I couldn't give you an exact figure right now as far as, how much that is going to be. Corey may know it off the top of his head if he has got those time values.
I don't, but we'll look those up while you're continuing with the presentation once we get through these couple other questions and respond back to that. I will note this isn't the final iteration of the BRT. There's a longer term master plan to kind of reimagine the Veirs Mill Road corridor and make it into more of a boulevard type feel. And that plan does add in more of the dedicated lanes. So, this is kind of what we may consider a phase one of the BRT project. And the hope would be that as the corridor changes character, that those lanes would get added and more dedicated lanes would be included to cover the pieces that aren't going to be included as part of phase one.
We have a question from Mike Stein. Mike, if you you can unmute yourself and ask.
Yes, thank you. You showed some of the station renderings for a few of the stops, especially the more stops at major intersections. Is the assumption that all the stations will look the same? It was hard to tell how different each one was, but will all the stations sort of look the same, or will some stations be like smaller or more bare bones, or what can you tell us about any difference between stations at some of the stops that were not shown?
Sure. The stations pretty much are going to look the same in terms of having the same basic features. They're going to have the totem, as we call it, the station sign. That was the vertical column that you saw, like a tower. And they are going to have the surround glass shields and the benches, and they're going to have the fare dispensers and station information panel, smart panel, as we call it, and the weather protections that you saw. The size, the number of the weather protections obviously will differ based on the geometry. I can tell you some of the stations, we have what we call geometric or right-of-way constraints. So by necessity, the fact that we are constrained, they are not going to be as large as other ones. So that's a given. And but in terms of the basic design features, they are all going to have the same thing. And last, the renderings didn't show it. We are going to incorporate, aesthetics or, art design features for this corridor. And as far as what that would be, I couldn't tell you right now. That's going to be something we look at during final design. But based on, our envisioning it, it may have, each station may end up having somewhat of a personal identity in terms of the art features or aesthetics that are, like on the ground or the mosaic display or whatever art displays at each station. So each of them might have its own bit of character.
Thank you. I also had a stormwater management question. Is it too early to ask that, or is it?
If you want to hold off, let me cover the slides for that, Mike. Then you can ask your question if I don't address it.
Thank you.
We also have a question from someone on the phone at 547-97. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
They may need to hit *6 to unmute.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes. The question I want to ask, if this new bus service, it's in addition to all the buses that are already on Veirs Mill Road, and because I live on Center Hill Street, and it's very difficult to cross over to make that left turn in the morning. We did ask at the Citizen Association some time ago for them to put a traffic light there. And they said it was too close to Connecticut Avenue. So it's a jostle in the morning to get across there, because some of the motorists, even when the light up at Connecticut is on red, they've just blocked the intersection, so you can't get across. All right, that's one. And I'm wondering, with all this new project, how much more it's going to add to our property taxes in the community.
Okay. This is in addition to the existing bus services that are there by Bomara or Ride-On. In terms of the Connecticut Avenue, in case you missed it, that is one location we are making, I would say, significant geometric improvement, and all of that is with the intent of improving pedestrian safety. And we believe that objective will be met. In other words, what we're proposing will drastically improve pedestrian safety. In terms of affecting your property taxes, it will not, in the sense that your property taxes are not going to go up to fund this project. They are not going to be assessed because of the improvements from this project.
Okay, thank you.
Michael, I don't see any other questions in chat or raised hands. We can wait another few seconds for anybody else, but we could probably move on after that. We did get another question from Lynette Allen. She is asking, is this project approved?
I'm not sure what you mean by approved. The project has been approved in the sense by the county council. It has been funded through final design. As far as the funding for construction, I was going to talk about it later, but that's fine. I'll mention it now. We are applying for federal grants, small start grants. So we are coordinating with the Federal Transit Administration. And obviously there's going to be some funding locally. But if by approve, you mean the council has approved this project to be designed and it is on the capital budget program, yes, the answer is yes.
She also has a follow-up question. With all the transportation on the Veirs Mill Road corridor, why is this needed?
With all the, I'm sorry, I will repeat the question just to make sure I understood it. With all the
With all the transportation on the Veirs Mill Road corridor, why is this needed?
Okay. Well, there is obviously, this is a corridor where there is a lot of transit ridership. And what this service does, it has some very unique features compared to the existing WMATA or ride-on bus service, one of which I'll be talking about, the signal priority, transit signal priority, that it makes it a much more robust, efficient, and faster service. So it will reduce commuting time for not only the people who use it, but it will improve the efficiency and operation for commuters, even vehicular commuters that are using the road. So it improves the operation of the whole corridor, especially on Veirs Mill Road.
So you said this was approved through final design. I guess there will be additional funding requests to actually get it up and operating. But I guess I would make the comment that, if we did need to tweak, there are some nice master plan stuff like the stations, but I would say, if we can get at least the transit signal priority, potentially that could lead to the highest amount of time savings in addition to any dedicated lanes for the buses. I think from a passenger perspective, there's a lot of current riders now that may not necessarily care for upgraded transit facilities, stations. They'd like to just see more service, faster, more reliable service. Actually, there's a lot of travel time right now built into the current schedule of the Q route that travels that entire corridor. So buses are frequently early. And I think that's part of why I brought up, what's the projected time savings? I'd like to see, buses move through there faster, but even the current schedule, there's more time allowed. They can run that route faster the way the traffic is currently, even before the pandemic.
Thank you for your comment. Jennifer, if there are no other questions, let's move on.
Okay, I think you can move on.
Okay, next I'll start talking about stormwater management. As I mentioned before, by state regulation and local regulations, we have to have stormwater management, which is treating the runoff that's generated from any new impervious area by this project. The slide that you see on the right is like one type of stormwater management facility. I'll use a layman's expression. It's like a cake, different layers of different media. There is bioretention soil, then underneath it there is gravel. On the one side, on the left side of this image, is the inflow, in this example, where the water comes in. And once it gets treated, the excess amount leaves through an underground pipe, and it typically ties into the nearby storm drain system or drains to the nearest stream channel. Most people, when you look at it from the street, you don't see any of this. All you see is basically like some landscaping. I'll show you a couple of images in a few seconds. As far as the project, this is one tough, difficult, that's challenging is probably the most appropriate word to use to come up with the stormwater management, because pretty much everywhere is developed. It's impervious, concrete or asphalt. And so finding locations to put these features, these facilities, was a challenge for our team. But one of those locations, for instance, was the intersection of Connecticut Avenue, where we are removing the existing slip ramp. So in their place, where there used to be slip ramps, we are putting some of these facilities. So we looked at wherever we could do this, and obviously the soils underneath have to be conducive to do this. And we believe we have found sufficient locations to meet the stormwater management needs for this project. Next. I forgot to mention in the last slide, there are a couple of places where we have what we call offsite. In most of the places where we are proposing these treatment facilities are along the corridor or on-site, as it's called. We do have a couple of small off-site facilities that are outside of the right-of-way corridor of this project. Next slide. What you see in the image, to a layman's term, you can see behind the trees are the travel lanes, and on the left side of the image is like the sidewalk or shared use path, and somebody walking things. Well, this is just the grass strip between the road and the sidewalk and some trees coming out of it. This, in fact, is like a stormwater management facility, like a vegetated channel. And so that's the beauty of it, if I may use that expression, that to the layman's eye, it just looks like grass or landscaping. But in fact, it is meeting the stormwater management needs and treating the runoff from the project. And all of this obviously reduces erosion, and the water is being treated. Next slide. These are some examples, certain types of facilities, terms that you may or may not have heard about. Bioretention, which was the diagram earlier I went over, and I use the expression like a cake, layers of a cake that has media. The image on the left is what's called like a micro bioretention, or a small facility. And then there is another one on the image on the right side, again, a smaller version of it. To a layman, walking, they may just see the landscaping or some vegetation coming out, but they're in fact the stormwater management facilities that provide treatment. As I mentioned, there are a couple of small offsites. One of them actually is very, very close to the corridor itself. It's on Gaynor Road, near Veirs Mill Road, and the other one is on Randolph Road at Neville Street. So those are a couple of offsites that we have to meet the stormwater management needs for this project. Next slide. What you see is the transit signal priority. The illustration or animation shows how it works. Basically, as the BRT bus is approaching the intersection, it sends a message to the traffic signal that I'm approaching. If possible, can you kind of speed up turning green, or if it's already green, to stay green for a couple of seconds longer. In overall, it does not affect the operation of the intersection. And I want to emphasize that this system, the TSP, transit signal priority, is not the same thing that the emergency vehicles use. They take over the operation of the signal altogether to make sure that the ambulance or the fire truck runs through the intersection. This, the TSP for the BRT system, it improves the efficiency and operation of the BRT, and also it helps the whole corridor. That includes the other vehicles on the corridor to have much better travel times. And we are planning for 20 intersections along this corridor to have TSP. And I know we had a comment as far as, having more TSP. For people who may recall, when we came out of planning, we only had identified 9 locations. So now we are looking at making it 20 intersections that would have TSP. This is going to be one corridor with very good operations. Next slide. As far as coordination with other projects, I briefly mentioned it. One of them is the the BRT project along Maryland 355. That's a much longer corridor. It's challenging too. And we are coordinating with that. Obviously, as I mentioned, about 1.5 miles, 2 of the stations on this corridor are along 355. So we are coordinating with that project. The next one is there is a private developer near University Boulevard called Wheaton Gateway. We are coordinating with them. And finally is the BIPA projects. BIPA stands for Bicycle and Pedestrian Priority Areas. And there is one project, the western segment, which is already under design. 2 other ones, the central and eastern segments, are going to get started design soon. We are coordinating with that. So people who attended the planning phase of the public presentations that we made, we mentioned that one component of the project is improving the access to this BRT project, to the corridors. Within 0.5 mile of each station, we evaluate what we can do as far as having sidewalks or cyclist facilities for people to reach the station. So as you can see, we are kind of expediting that as far as the BIPA projects along this corridor. As I said, there are 3 of them. One is called the western segment, central segment, and eastern segment. The 3, we are coordinating closely with those to see if we can bring those online, get them constructed at the same time that this project, the BRT project, is constructed. Next slide. As far as the schedule, as I indicated, the preliminary design is pretty much done. We're going to start the final design next year. That should take us about 2 years. In the spring of 22, that's next spring, we are going to go before Park and Planning, the board, for mandatory referral. In 23 and 24 is when property acquisition and utility relocations will take place. And between 2024 and 2026 is construction. And I want to say that there is an asterisk, as you can see, that's pending, that's contingent on getting funding for those phases for property acquisition and construction. And we expect that if we do get the funding, the corridor will be open and operational in 2027. That's the schedule right now. Next. Next step, as I mentioned, we're going to go before the planning board for mandatory referral. We also have been coordinating with the city of Rockville. We have to go before them. That's an entirely separate jurisdiction from the Park and Planning. We are looking into what we call delivery methods, in basically how we take this project to construction. There are a couple of different methods we can use. We want to find the most efficient and quickest way to take this project from design to construction. So we are evaluating all the options. As far as the funding, we are working closely with the Federal Transit Administration, applying for small starts grant, and obviously we're looking for local sources as well. As far as the final design, once we step into it, we try to, for any other geometric design project, we look into reducing the footprint, having as little as possible in terms of right-of-way impacts and utility impacts, and then we'll be fine-tuning, as I mentioned, as we learn lessons from the US 29 flash route, as well as the comments that we get from citizens, the station design. So these are the things that we will be looking at and working on during final design. And we'll continue to coordinating with the BIPA projects and the 355 BRT project that I mentioned earlier. And we will be evaluating the type of vehicles, the buses that we're going to get for this corridor. So that's still under evaluation right now to try to get as close as possible to zero emissions. Next. That's the end of it. I believe the next slide, and we can jump into the next slide, has my information, my contact information. And the best way to get a hold of me is via email, michael.mitchell@montgomerycountymd.gov. And that's my mailing address, but I'll just reiterate the best way to get in touch with me and is via email. So I will turn it over to Jennifer or you guys for any other questions you may have. By the way, Mike, I hope I answered your questions on stormwater management or station design, but if I didn't, go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So the stormwater management, earlier in the first part of the presentation, you're showing the maps. Is that inclusive of all areas that will be receiving stormwater management treatment, or were there other areas you didn't mention? And the reason I'm asking is just specifically that, as you may or may not know, there was a tremendous amount of flooding where the station will be at the corner of Twin Brook Parkway and Veirs Mill from the remnants of Hurricane Ida on September 1st. Those apartments, the Rock Creek Woods apartments, flooded. A young man died while trying to rescue his mother. And it was a localized heavy amount that fell. And, a lot of that was due to runoff from Veirs Mill Road, as well as the neighborhood there south of it, which is in the city of Rockville. So I wondered if that, had been looked at in terms of this project, or re-looked at, especially since that event happened, and if there was going to be any stormwater treatment in that general area along Veirs Mill Road.
Okay, well, as far as specifically, if I didn't mention it, at Twin Brook, we do have stormwater management facilities. Then I mentioned Connecticut, and where we could put in stormwater management facilities to meet the needs of this project, we have done so. But I want to make sure that you and others understand that we are only providing stormwater management for this project. Whatever impervious area we are creating or increasing, we are treating that. In terms of if there are any drainage deficiencies, such as flooding that you mentioned at whatever location, it doesn't matter if it was Twin Brook, wherever else, that is not within the existing scope of this project. That's an existing condition situation that this project has no bearing on. And that would be something that if it's coming from Veirs Mill Road, that would be Maryland State Highway Administration who would have to evaluate that. So I want to make sure that there is no misunderstanding that when we are talking about stormwater management, that we are looking at like any existing flooding issues elsewhere for other, caused by other issues. The stormwater management that is proposed for this project is as far as the needs of this project, and that's what all the regulations require us to do.
Thank you. And yes, I understand that that would not be within the scope of this project. I just wondered if the impacts of that storm caused you to take another look at that intersection. And then also you had mentioned, because you are coordinating with different jurisdictions, including the State Highway Administration, just within this project, if there was any possibility, for them to tackle some of those issues, and if that was being talked about. That's all I'm asking.
Well, Mike, now that you've mentioned
not expecting you to fix all of Veirs Mill Road.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you giving us that discount. But yes, we will mention it at our next meeting with our colleagues at SHA when the next time we meet with them to make sure that they are aware of that issue.
Michael, we have a couple questions. We have one from Ethan Goffman. What portion of the project will have bus-only lanes?
There is certain segments of it that they have their own, dedicated bus lanes. For instance, roughly from Twin Brook, going for, I want to say almost like a couple of miles in the eastbound direction. But the rest of the corridor is they have to. Is what we call shared use. They have to use the travel lanes with the other motorists. As Corey mentioned, when this project came out of the planning phase, what the county council approved is for us to do this. In other words, as much as we could do, get this system, this BRT up and running within the available right-of-way that is there today. But it remains that in the future, we can always come back and revisit it. That's how they left it. That's the option that they chose. And Corey used the expression phase two. In phase two, once this system is up and running, this flash is up and running, then they can look into improving it further. And one way to do that by lengthening the queue jump lanes or having more dedicated lanes for the BRT buses.
Michael, we also have a question from Tom Pogue. He says, do you anticipate any new or additional funding for the project might arise from the recently passed federal infrastructure bill? Has there been any advances in electric articulated buses that would make this propulsion option more viable?
Well, I will take the question in reverse. Tom, yes, obviously, as I mentioned briefly, we are looking at different options in terms of the types of vehicles that we're going to utilize when the system gets up and running. That's one of the things we look at during final design. In terms of the infrastructure bill which just passed, all I can tell you is obviously we have been working with the Federal Transit Administration. We are applying for small starts grants, and I'm just giving you my personal opinion. This is not a fact. It's not engineering, or a politician talking. Obviously, with the passage of that federal bill, our chances are probably a lot better in terms of getting federal funding for this project.
Thanks, Michael.
We also have a question from Jax. What property were you referring to or a little bit earlier that will be acquired?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I mentioned any specific property being acquired. So
I think you actually mentioned that no properties were going to be acquired, but maybe you can review that again.
Oh, I will clarify that. No, there's no displacement. Displacement means if there was a house somewhere and we needed the original, let me step back. When the planning was done, original planning for this corridor was done by MDOT SHA. At that time, their planning design showed some displacement. Displacement means that to put, for instance, a BRT station or a queue jump associated with any of the stations, we would have to purchase somebody's house or business. That's called a displacement. And there were a number of displacements as the project was done during the planning phase by SHA. We have eliminated all displacements. We still do have property acquisition needs. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head exactly where they are or how much from each property owner, but as we progress further into final design and we prepare what are called plats, the takes, as we call them, the property needs, right-of-way needs, we will have that more detailed information at that time. But I don't think I mentioned any specific locations that I can tell you where we are buying how many square feet from who. I don't have that information.
Michael, I pulled up some figures to answer a couple of the questions that I think have been asked. There was a question about the travel time savings. At least based on the earlier planning work, in the the westbound direction, the travel time savings of the local bus will be about 7 minutes. And then in the eastbound direction, it'll be slightly more, depending on whether it's AM or PM, anywhere from 9 to 13 minutes travel time savings over the local bus. So pretty significant over what's a relatively short corridor. And then the figure of the portions of the project of this phase of the project that would be in some kind of dedicated right-of-way is about a third.
Thank you, Corey.
Do you know what accounts for the significance of it seems like the time savings in one direction is a lot more than the other direction. Do you have any inference as to why that could be?
Not off the top of my head. I'd have to read through the reports in a little bit more detail. I was just pulling the numbers off of the tables. But those reports are up on the project website, which I will drop a link to that in the chat here.
Thank you.
Shannon, what I can tell you generically, on any given road, the travel times in, for instance, eastbound versus westbound or northbound versus southbound, they are not always uniform. It just depends on the traffic patterns. That's how the traffic goes. And so that's just the nature of traffic. That's how it works. It's rarely equal 50-50.
Yep. I think that it was greater. Was it greater westbound?
Yeah, I believe the Vista modeling was showing the westbound issues at Twin Brook Parkway.
Got it. So that would be the Wheaton towards Rockville direction.
Yes.
Okay.
Michael, we have another question from Tom. He's asking, do you have projected peak and off-peak frequencies of the BRT buses yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. Tom, I have memorized it for my previous presentation. I don't have it off the top of my head. Hopefully Corey will help, but I believe that we're going to run. So Corey, well, rather than me just taking a stab at it, Corey can, if he has it at his fingertips, he can pull it up. They are more frequent during the rush hour. I wanted to say it was between 5 to 10 minute intervals, and during a I believe it was 10 to 15 minutes, but hopefully Corey can get his hands on those figures.
Working on it now.
Thank you.
Sounds like that would be similar to the US 29 corridor, Michael or Corey.
US 29 is 7.5 minutes during the peak and 15 minutes in the off peak, so not too dissimilar.
Yeah, that's good.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or send me a chat, or you can just place it in the main chat with for everyone to see.
Can I just throw out a question?
By all means. By the way, if you saw Corey,
yes, please do.
Yeah, before Tom asked his question, Corey just posted it, so the figures I gave you were correct as far as the anticipated frequency of the operation. Tom, go ahead.
I assume that this corridor, the BRT, would have prepayment of the fare, that you'd pay it at the station before you got on the bus. Is that do you know how that's working on 29 so far? Has that been pretty smooth?
Well, the first part of your question is yes. As far as the operation of it, Corey can answer that as far as how well it's working on US 29 Flash.
So
it's free right now.
I was going to say, since the service started last October, we've been under a fare-free policy for transit. So we actually haven't collected any fares on the Flash route yet. So we can't say how it's working.
I forgot about that. Yeah, I forgot about that.
So yet to be seen.
Thanks.
We have a question from Lynette Allen. Has St. Catherine Church on Veirs Mill Road been considered as a stop for the Flash?
If you can tell me what's the nearest intersection, I can tell you, but I don't think it was itself a BRT stop.
Scott, maybe you can flip to the map slide. Oh, Claridge Road?
So Michael, I think previously at one point there was discussion about Newport Mill Road as a potential station, and we moved it to Norris because of the better conditions with the signalized intersection there, and the upgrades for safety. So that looks to be it. Claridge is between Connecticut and Norris.
Yeah.
Almost exactly in the middle. So I think that, I guess, to give a little bit more detail on that, I don't believe it was ever considered as a station location. I don't know if some of our consultant team members who recall from previous studies, but with the BRT, it's a delicate balancing act between providing lots of access along the corridor like a local bus, but also fewer stops to try and speed up the service. So, we tend to focus on the most critical locations like a Connecticut Avenue, where we have a major crossing, or Norris Drive or University Boulevard. But the local services will still remain in the corridor to continue to provide service to the church. That's a fair point. We are, as I mentioned, it's a balancing act between providing the same level of access that the local bus that stops much more frequently and trying to keep the service moving faster.
I may say so. That's the reason we call it BRT, Bus Rapid Transit.
Or maybe just a quick comment here with that concern, and I know we're years from potentially launching this to go live anyway, but I guess down the road there could be like more so a limited stop. We've seen that in other cities where they've eliminated the local entirely, but they've eliminated some of the stops along this corridor, but keep retain like the transit signal priority dedicated lanes. I guess time will tell if that could be a feasible alternative to actually having these specific stations, and maybe there could be a cost savings there without the infrastructure. So just a
Thank you for that comment.
Michael, I don't have any more questions at this time from
Okay, thank
anyone
you.
in queue.
Well, thank you everybody for attending, and I really appreciate both the comments and the questions. It shows that the public is engaged and interested in this project, and we really appreciate it. As you can see, my email is up. If you have any other questions or comments, you want to send them to me after tonight's meeting, that's fine. If I don't know the answer, I will get back to you. But we are here to address any comments or questions you all may have.
Thank you.
Sure.
Michael and Corey, good to see you still at it, still serving the public. Keep it up.
Thanks, Tom.